Hey everyone, this is David B. with another video to help you practice your English listening. In today's video, I want to talk about a topic based on a question that someone sent me. So I got a message today from a woman on HelloTalk. She is from Egypt, and she told me that she watched my video about how to get more responses to messages on HelloTalk. But she says, what if as an English learner, she's not good at having long conversations? She doesn't know what to talk about, and also she doesn't know what the other person's privacy boundaries are. They may simply not want to talk about the same subject. What are some tricks that I have in that case? So I was thinking about this topic, and I have a few ideas. I think there's two main factors involved. One is your overall conversational skills, and you could think of that in terms of your own native language. If you were communicating with someone in your own native language, would you be able to keep the conversation going? And the second part would be your English level and how that interferes with your ability to communicate with someone. So let me start with the first one, your overall conversation skills. This is a topic that there are entire books written about. People dedicate their lives to trying to figure out. But let me just share some basic thoughts. I think, first of all, your conversation skills develop the more that you do it. For example, I work a job where I have to interact with the public. And at first, I was uncomfortable with it and didn't really know how to keep conversations going. But the more I did it, the more that I saw that most conversations were the same pattern. And so the more you do it, the more you see that pattern, and you start to see that certain things that you say, people respond to in certain ways. And you learn that some things that you say are awkward or kill the conversation, so you start to avoid those. Other things you say, you get a good reaction, and so you start using those more. And I think the same thing applies when you're chatting with people online in a language exchange context. So let's talk about a conversation when you meet a language exchange partner for the first time. Usually it begins with exchanging some basic information like your name, your age, what you do for work, or what you study in school. Just basic small talk. You might talk about what the weather's like in your area. And usually that's okay at first. But the problem is sometimes the conversation dies right after that. The next step to keep the conversation going is you could ask questions or you could offer information. But the trick is it has to be done in a way that the other person doesn't feel like they're being interviewed or interrogated. So, and this comes into how you deal with your limited English level, because questions are easier to ask if your English is basic, because you can have a whole list of questions to ask someone. You know, where are you from? What countries have you traveled to? Have you ever been to my country? What are your interests? What kind of music do you like? And the person can respond to those. One thing you want to avoid is you always just asking the question and they answer it. Then you ask an unrelated question and they answer it, because that is very boring for the other person. I think the best way to handle it is to ask a question, the other person answers, and then either you need to build on what they said, or you need to give your own response to the question and explain the way you would answer the question. And part of getting experience just through doing it over and over is you'll come to situations where you want to say a certain thing, and that's the sentence you would say in your native language, but you're not sure how to say it in English. So at that point, you should do your best to put out a sentence, but afterwards you could maybe look at it and say, this is what I was trying to say. What is the correct way to say it? Or maybe your language partner will even correct you. You could always ask them. And you should understand that when someone is sending English to me, even if it's very broken English and the grammar is completely wrong, I can still understand what the general point is. The important words are all there. So don't worry too much if your grammar is not perfect. It's usually more interesting to me if someone attempts to say something interesting and something more complex than if they just stick to simple and safe sentences. Those can be very boring, or if they're just asking me questions over and over, I'll get bored very easily. But if they're making an attempt to communicate with me something interesting, something about their own life, even if their English isn't good, I can still understand what they're trying to say, and I'll be more interested in the conversation. Another thing you can try is sharing more information about yourself or even sending photos. And it doesn't have to be photos of yourself, but it could be photos of what you're eating. It could be a photo outside your window. What does the landscape look like? It could be a photo of something famous in your city. Remember, we're talking with people in other parts of the world with different cultures. So what is normal to you and what is just a boring everyday item or a boring meal could be really interesting to someone like me who doesn't eat that kind of food. Or I live in an area that's very green with a lot of forests. Maybe you live in a more desert area, or maybe you live in a big city, whereas I live in a small town. So just because you see something every day doesn't mean that someone else won't be interested. And I think photos are a good way to keep, if you don't know what to say, send them an interesting photo and say, this is a famous spot in my town, or this is a picture of the store that I just went to, or the restaurant I just went to. And then that'll help keep the conversation going. As you have more and more conversations with language exchange partners, you'll begin to get a better feel for certain sentence structures, where you'll have something that you want to say, and you'll be able to take previous sentences that you've learned and build on them to put them together correctly. So I think that it can help to go and analyze where you've got stuck before, learn the proper way to say it, and then use that to build more sentences in the future. Also remember, don't be too hard on yourself if someone stops answering. Maybe they only had a few minutes to chat and now they got busy doing something else. We all have busy lives. So just because they didn't answer your message doesn't mean that they thought you were boring or your English is bad or they never want to talk to you again. Maybe they just got distracted with something else. And if you send them a message again some other time and they're available to chat, they'll continue the conversation. Remember that on language exchange apps like HelloTalk, most conversations won't go anywhere. They'll die out relatively quickly. But when you find someone that you can begin to have a conversation with and that you're interested in, and they seem to be interested in getting to know you better, then stick with that person and really put some effort in to find some conversational topics and just keep the conversation going and try to make a friend. It can be difficult to transition from that basic small talk at the beginning to a more meaningful conversation. So I think the solution is just to share a bit of your culture, ask questions to try to learn about their life, and when there's something that someone seems interested in, go with that line of conversation. I hope these tips help you. This is David B. Thanks for watching.